What happens when the woman who gave everything to her family is told she is not welcome at Christmas dinner? What happens when love becomes a weapon used against you? This is the story of Dorothy Hamilton, and what she discovered will shock you. Before we begin, if this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to Voices of Auntie Belle. We would love to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Tell us in the comments. We love hearing from our family around the world. Now, let's begin. Dorothy Hamilton had always believed that Christmas was sacred. For 45 years, she had wrapped presents with careful fingers, baked pies from recipes passed down through generations, and opened her arms to anyone who needed a place to belong on that cold December day. At 67 years old, with silver hair pinned neatly in place and hands that had learned kindness through decades of service, Dorothy understood one simple truth. Family was everything. Family was the reason she had worked double shifts at the department store. Family was the reason she had saved every penny. Family was the reason her heart still beat. Her son Daniel was her youngest, her gentle boy who had grown into a gentle man. When he married Melissa 5 years ago, Dorothy had felt nothing but joy. Melissa was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was smart and ambitious and had a laugh that seemed to fill rooms. Dorothy had welcomed her into the family like a daughter. She had taught her recipes. She had defended her to relatives who asked too many questions. She had loved her, the way mothers do when they are grateful their children have found someone to hold them through life. But this morning on Christmas Day, as Dorothy rolled her small suitcase up the driveway of the beautiful two-story home at 2847 Maple Street, something felt different. The house was magnificent, painted in soft cream with dark green shutters. Wreaths hung perfectly symmetrical on every window. The lawn had been manicured to impossible smoothness. Everything about it screamed success and perfection. But as Dorothy approached the front door, she felt a small, quiet chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Daniel opened the door with a smile, and for a moment, everything felt right. He hugged his mother the way he always did, warm and genuine, and Dorothy allowed herself to believe that this Christmas would be like all the others. She stepped into the foyer, where a grand staircase curved upward and the smell of cooking filled the air. But it was not the cooking she recognized. There were no familiar spices, no warmth of a family kitchen that had been cooking since dawn. Instead, the smells were strange and sophisticated, hired and hollow. Melissa appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a dress so elegant it made Dorothy's homemade green sweater feel suddenly shabby. Her face held a smile, but it was the kind of smile that does not reach the eyes. The kind of smile that is a performance. Daniel did not notice. He was already taking Dorothy's coat, already asking about her drive, already showing her to the living room where a fire was burning in the fireplace. What happened next would change everything. As Dorothy settled into the living room, she had unpacked her suitcase upstairs and brought down the apple pie she had spent 4 hours preparing. She had made it from scratch, using her mother's recipe, with apples she had selected one by one from the farmer's market. The crust was golden and flawless. Steam still rose from the lattice top. It was, without question, the most beautiful thing in that perfect house. When she walked into the kitchen to find a place for it, Melissa was there, and her face changed. Not subtly. Not in a way that could be mistaken for anything else. Her eyes narrowed. Her jaw tightened. She looked at the pie as though Dorothy had walked into her home carrying something dangerous and unwanted. "I brought my famous apple pie," Dorothy said gently, holding it forward like an offering. "For our dessert after dinner. I know how much Daniel loves it." Melissa did not take the pie. Instead, she turned to the counter, where an expensive bakery box sat open, revealing a professional dessert that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "We already have dessert," she said quietly. "I ordered it from that place in the city. The one that costs $200. Dorothy felt her heart drop, but she said nothing. She set the pie down on a small corner table and stepped back. Perhaps Melissa simply had different plans this year. Perhaps this was about efficiency, about wanting to spend time with family rather than fussing over preparations. Dorothy could understand that. She had always been flexible. She had always been the kind of person who adapted to keep the peace. But then Melissa did something that would echo through the next 24 hours and change the trajectory of everything that followed. She walked out of the kitchen and into the living room where Daniel was setting up the table for dinner. Dorothy followed, curious, hoping that perhaps there was still a place for her in this day, still a role she could play. "Daniel," Melissa said, her voice smooth and controlled, "we need to talk about the dinner arrangements." Daniel looked up, confused. What do you mean? Everything is ready. We'll eat in about an hour. Melissa's eyes moved to Dorothy, and in that gaze was something so cold, so deliberate, that Dorothy felt genuinely afraid. Your mother cannot eat with us, Melissa said simply. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. What? Daniel said, his voice uncertain. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that this is my home, and I decide who sits at my table. Your mother can eat on the back porch. Melissa turned to Dorothy with a smile that was not a smile at all. There's a nice chair out there. You can sit there and eat, like a dog eating scraps from its owner's table. That seems appropriate, don't you think? Dorothy felt the world tilt. She could not breathe. She could not speak. This was not happening. This could not be happening. Melissa, that's not funny, Daniel said, his voice rising slightly. But there was uncertainty in it. Uncertainty that broke Dorothy's heart more than the cruelty itself. I'm not trying to be funny, Melissa said. I'm being clear. Your mother's passive-aggressive comments about my life choices have gone on long enough. Today is about celebrating what I have built. What I have become. Not about catering to an old woman who thinks the world still revolves around her nostalgia. She paused, and her voice became even quieter, even more cutting. There is no place for her here. Dorothy did not wait for Daniel to defend her. She did not wait for him to choose her or to stand up for what was right. Instead, she moved slowly toward the back door, gathered her jacket, and stepped out into the cold December afternoon. Behind her, she heard Daniel's voice rising in protest, but she did not turn around. She could not bear to see the conflict on his face, the impossible choice between his wife and his mother. The porch was cold and empty, and Dorothy sat on a wooden chair as promised. Alone. Unwanted. Rejected on the day that was supposed to be about family and love and belonging. But as she sat there in the freezing dark, watching the golden light pour from the windows of the house behind her, Dorothy Hamilton made a quiet decision. She would not cry. She would not leave. She would not accept this cruelty as her final story. Instead, she would discover the truth about the woman who had humiliated her. And that truth would change everything. The cold of the porch seeped into Dorothy's bones as she sat alone in the darkness. Through the windows, she could see the golden glow of the dining room. She could hear laughter, the clink of glasses, the sounds of a family celebrating without her. Daniel's voice rose and fell, and she wondered if he was defending her to his wife, or if he had already accepted her exile as the price of peace. Time moved differently when you were sitting in the cold. Minutes felt like hours. The pie she had made with such care sat inside the warm kitchen, going to waste. Dorothy thought about all the other Christmas dinners she had attended in this house, all the time she had been welcomed and cherished. She thought about the moment Melissa had looked at her with such contempt, such calculated cruelty. That look was not an accident. That look was a choice. At some point, Daniel came to the back door. He had brought her a plate of food, warmed under foil, and a cup of hot tea. His face was pale and confused. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said, and she could hear the conflict breaking his voice. "She's just stressed about the holidays. She doesn't mean it." But Dorothy knew the truth. People who did not mean something did not plan it so carefully. Melissa had chosen every word, measured every cruelty. She had humiliated her in front of her son deliberately, and now she was allowing her son to believe it was a momentary lapse rather than a window into who she truly was. "It's all right, sweetheart," Dorothy said, taking the plate from his trembling hands. "You go back to your wife. Enjoy your dinner." Daniel hesitated at the door, torn between two women, and Dorothy realized in that moment that something fundamental had shifted in her relationship with her son. He loved her, yes, but he was afraid of his wife. Fear, Dorothy understood, was more powerful than love. Fear made people do terrible things. After he went back inside, Dorothy sat with the plate of food untouched. Her appetite had vanished, replaced by something harder and colder than hunger. It was the feeling of clarity. It was the moment when a person stops accepting lies and starts looking for truth. She waited until the house grew quiet. She waited until the lights upstairs flickered on and the sounds of movement suggested that Melissa and Daniel had gone to bed. Then, careful and deliberate, she made her way into the house through the back door that Daniel, in his guilt, had left unlocked. Dorothy had never been a woman who snooped. She had been raised to respect privacy, to trust that people were who they claimed to be. But that had been before today.
That had been before her son's wife had looked at her with such contempt and told her there was no place for her in a family she had spent 67 years loving.
The house was dark and strange at night. Dorothy moved slowly, her hand trailing along the banister of the grand staircase. She knew that Daniel's office was on the second floor, a room where he kept his computer and the papers of his life. She also knew that Melissa spent most of her time in a small sitting room off the master bedroom, a space she kept locked and private. Dorothy had always respected that boundary. Not anymore. The sitting room door was locked, but Melissa had hidden the key in the same place most people hid things. It was in a decorative box on the dresser, beneath a pile of scarves. Dorothy's hand shook as she turned the key, as she opened the door, as she stepped into the private sanctum of her daughter-in-law's life. What she found there would have broken her heart if her heart had not already been broken beyond repair. Photographs. Hundreds of them. Tucked into albums and scattered across a small desk. Dorothy's eyes went wide as she looked at image after image. Melissa with a man who was not her husband. A tall man with graying hair and a confident smile. In some photographs they were in hotel rooms, tangled together.
In others they were at restaurants, his hand on her back, her head tilted toward his in an intimacy that spoke of long deception.
In one particularly cruel image, they were at a restaurant that Dorothy recognized, a place where Daniel had taken her for her birthday just months ago. The date stamp on the photo showed it had been taken the day after her birthday dinner. Dorothy's fingers trembled as she held the photographs. Her breath came in shallow gasps. This was not just an affair. This was calculated betrayal, carefully hidden, deliberately continued. This was a woman who had looked into her husband's eyes every day and lied. But there was more. Dorothy found bank statements. She found credit card bills. She found receipts from hotels and restaurants that did not match Melissa's carefully constructed story about working late at the office. She found evidence of money being diverted into a separate account, money that came from the household finances that Daniel trusted his wife to manage. Thousands of dollars, year after year, hidden in plain sight. Dorothy photographed everything with her old phone. Her hands shook so badly she had to try multiple times to get clear images. But she did it. She documented the betrayal with the same care and precision that Melissa had used to execute it. As she worked, Dorothy felt something shift inside her. It was not anger, though anger was there. It was not sadness, though sadness was there too. What she felt was a kind of grim determination. This woman had humiliated her on Christmas Day, had cast her out like she was nothing, had then lied to her son's face about why. But Dorothy was going to make sure that those lies were exposed. She was going to make sure that truth won. She spent 3 hours in that sitting room, documenting Melissa's affair and the financial deceit that had funded it. She found emails on Melissa's laptop, messages with someone named Tom Patterson, a man whose name appeared repeatedly in the photographs and whose identity she soon confirmed through a quick search. He was Melissa's boss at the marketing firm where she worked. He was married. He had children. By the time Dorothy left the sitting room and locked it behind her, dawn was breaking over the neighborhood. She was exhausted but awake in a way she had never been before. She understood now that she had been living in a dream, a comfortable fantasy where people were who they claimed to be. That dream was over. She gathered her suitcase quietly and left the house before anyone woke. She drove to a small coffee shop 3 blocks away and sat in a booth with a cup of bitter coffee, reviewing the photographs on her phone. She thought about her son, about the life he had built with a woman who had been lying to him since the day they met. She thought about the birthday dinner just months ago, when Melissa had smiled at Daniel across the table while her lover waited in a hotel room nearby. Dorothy knew what she had to do. She knew it would not be easy. She knew it would create a storm that would shake the foundations of her son's life. But she also knew that sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is tell the truth, even when that truth is terrible. She pulled out her phone and called Daniel. It was 7 in the morning, but she did not care. Her son answered on the 3rd ring, his voice groggy and confused. "Mom? What's wrong? Where are you?" Dorothy took a breath. The moment was here. The moment when everything would change.
"Daniel," she said quietly, "I need you to listen to me.
Very carefully. What I am about to tell you is going to hurt, but you need to know the truth. Your wife is not who you think she is. I have proof. And we need to talk." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Daniel said, "Mom, what are you talking about?" Dorothy closed her eyes. "Not on the phone, sweetheart. I'm coming back to the house." But I want you to prepare yourself. Everything is about to change. As she drove back toward her son's house, toward the confrontation that would shatter his carefully constructed world, Dorothy felt something like peace settle over her. She did not know what would come next. She did not know if Daniel would believe her, if he would stand by his mother or by his wife. But she knew that she had made the right choice. She knew that truth, no matter how painful, was always better than the comfortable lie. The Christmas that was supposed to be about family and love had become something else entirely. It had become about justice. It had become about a mother protecting her son from a woman who had proven herself willing to destroy everything for her own selfish desires. And as Dorothy pulled into the driveway of the house at 2847 Maple Street, she understood that the hardest part was still ahead. But she was ready. She was stronger than she had ever been. And she would not stop until the truth was told and her son was free. Daniel was waiting on the front porch when Dorothy pulled into the driveway. His face was pale, and she could see that he had not slept. He had thrown a sweater over his pajamas, and his hair was still disheveled from bed. When he saw his mother, he rushed down the steps toward her, and she could feel the fear radiating from him. "Mom, what's going on? You're scaring me," he said, pulling her into a hug that felt desperate and uncertain. Dorothy held her son for a moment, gathering her courage. She could feel him trembling, and she understood that what she was about to do would hurt him in ways that would take years to heal. But there was no other path forward. There was only truth or continued deception, and she loved him too much to let him live a lie. "Let's go inside," she said quietly. "We need to talk as a family." Daniel hesitated. "Melissa is still sleeping.
"Whatever this is, maybe we should talk alone first."
But Dorothy shook her head. "No. She needs to hear this. And she needs to hear it now, while you are present and strong enough to listen to the truth without her manipulating it." They went inside together. Dorothy waited in the living room while Daniel went upstairs to wake his wife. She could hear the muffled sounds of conversation, then a door closing, then footsteps on the stairs.
When they appeared, Melissa was dressed and made up. Her hair perfectly styled. Her face arranged in an expression of confused concern that Dorothy now understood was a mask worn by an expert liar. "Dorothy, what's all this about?" Melissa asked, sitting down on the sofa with the kind of confidence that comes from someone who believes they have hidden their tracks well.
"Daniel said you had something urgent to tell us?" Dorothy did not sit down. She stood in the center of the living room, and she pulled out her phone. Her hands were steady now. Her voice was clear. This was the moment she had been preparing for since she sat alone on that cold porch. "I am going to show you something," Dorothy said, looking directly at her son. "And I want you to know that I did not discover this to hurt you. I discovered this because you deserve to know who you are married to." She turned her phone around and held it up. On the screen was a photograph of Melissa and Tom Patterson, tangled together in a hotel room bed, their bodies intertwined with an intimacy that left no room for doubt. Daniel's face went white. All the color drained from it in a single moment, leaving him looking like a ghost of himself. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Melissa stood up so quickly that she knocked over a lamp. "What? How did you get that?" she demanded, her voice shrill with panic. "That's invasion of privacy. That's illegal. You had no right to go through my things." But Dorothy was already showing Daniel another photograph. And then another. And then another. She showed him the hotel receipts. She showed him the bank statements with the diverted funds. She showed him the emails on Melissa's laptop, messages filled with endearments and plans and lies woven so carefully that they had become second nature. "No," Daniel whispered. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "No, this can't be real. This can't be happening." Melissa's panic transformed into something uglier. She tried to snatch the phone from Dorothy's hands, and when Dorothy stepped back, Melissa's face twisted with rage. "You manipulative old woman," she hissed. "You never wanted me to be happy. You never wanted your precious son to have a life that didn't revolve around you. So you went through my private things to try to destroy me. That's what this is about. You're a pathetic, lonely old woman, and you're jealous that Daniel has a life with someone else." The accusation was so backwards, so inverted from the truth, that for a moment it left Dorothy breathless. But then she saw something in her son's face shift. She saw the moment when he understood that his wife was not denying the affair. She was attacking his mother instead. "You're having an affair," Daniel said slowly, as if he was speaking a language he did not fully understand. "You're having an affair with Tom Patterson." Melissa's face changed again, cycling through emotions like a broken projector. Anger became desperation, became calculation, became cold, hard anger once more. "Yes," she said flatly. "Yes, I'm having an affair. And you know what? I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not. Tom understands me. Tom appreciates me. Tom doesn't bore me with his stupid job and his boring life and his pathetic devotion to his manipulative mother." Daniel flinched as though he had been struck. Dorothy could see her son breaking in real time, could see the foundations of his life crumbling before his eyes. "How long?" he asked quietly.
3 years, Melissa said, and there was almost a note of pride in her voice, as though she was admitting to an accomplishment rather than a betrayal.
3 years of hotel rooms and lies and pretending to care about your boring life. Dorothy watched as her son sat down slowly on the sofa. He looked like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 seconds. His hands were shaking, and when he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "We have been married for 5 years, he said.
"So you were already planning to sleep with him before we even said our vows."
The truth of that statement hung in the air like a physical thing. Melissa did not deny it. She simply stared at him with an expression that was completely empty of remorse.
"There's more,"
Dorothy said gently. She showed him the credit card statements, the money that had been diverted into a secret account, the thousands of dollars that had been taken from their shared finances to fund the affair and pay for hotel rooms and dinners and trips. Daniel looked up at his mother, and she could see that he was drowning. "She stole from me," he said, not quite believing it. "Yes," Dorothy said quietly. "She did." The front door opened then, and Daniel's best friend Marcus walked in. He had been called by Dorothy that morning before she came to the house. She had needed a witness, someone who could confirm that what was about to be revealed was true and not some elaborate misunderstanding. Behind Marcus came Linda, a woman who worked in accounting at the firm where Daniel was employed, a woman whose expertise and forensic attention to detail would prove invaluable in the days that followed. Melissa saw them and her face went even paler. "What is this?" she demanded. "What are you doing?" "I'm making sure my son knows the full extent of what you have done," Dorothy said calmly. "Linda has spent the last 2 hours going through the financial records. She has documented exactly how much money you stole, exactly where it went, and exactly what it was used for." Linda stepped forward with a folder full of papers. Her voice was professional and detached as she laid out the evidence of Melissa's financial crimes. $50,000. 3 years of systematic theft from a joint account. Money that had funded not just the affair but also expensive gifts for her lover, trips to resorts, and a level of spending that had been carefully hidden through false accounting and dummy transactions. Daniel listened in silence. His face had become completely numb, as though he had passed through shock and entered a state of emotional catatonia. Melissa tried to run then. She made for the stairs, but Marcus gently blocked her path. She was not under arrest, not yet anyway, but it was clear that she was not going to be allowed to simply disappear into her bedroom and pretend that none of this was happening. "This is not over," she spat, turning back to face them all. "You think you're so righteous, but you're not. You're all just jealous that I wanted more than this pathetic life. You're all just small-minded people who don't understand that I have dreams, I have needs, I have the right to pursue happiness." Dorothy felt something hard settle in her chest. "The right to pursue happiness?" she said quietly. "Yes, perhaps you do. But not at the cost of betraying and stealing from the man who loved you. Not at the cost of humiliating your family. And certainly not at the cost of casting an elderly woman out into the cold on Christmas Day because you were ashamed of who you really are." "I was not ashamed," Melissa snapped. "I was making a point. I was establishing boundaries." "You were being cruel," Dorothy said simply. "You were being cruel because you are a cruel person. And you were hoping that by breaking me down, by making me feel small and unwanted, I would not have the strength to see what you were really doing. But you underestimated me. You underestimated what a mother will do to protect her son." In the silence that followed, Daniel stood up. He looked at his wife as though she was a stranger, and perhaps to him, she was. Perhaps he was seeing for the first time that the woman he had married had never existed at all. Perhaps he was understanding that he had been in love with a fiction, a carefully constructed lie designed to trap him and use him. "I want you to leave," he said to Melissa, and his voice was steady now. The shock was fading, and something else was taking its place. Something that looked like clarity. Something that looked like strength. "This is my house too," Melissa said, but her voice had lost its edge. It had become desperate. "No," Daniel said. "This is my house. I bought this house. I paid for this house. And you are going to leave it. You can go to your lover. You can go to your apartment. I don't care. But you are done here." Melissa tried to argue, tried to negotiate, tried to manipulate, but Daniel had stopped listening. He called his lawyer, a woman he had met years ago and never thought he would need. He began the process of legal separation right there in his living room, with his mother standing beside him and his best friend as a witness. Within an hour, Melissa had packed a bag and left.
She drove away from the house at 2847 Maple Street with a screech of tires that seemed to echo the rage and humiliation she felt at having been exposed.
Dorothy watched her go with no feeling of triumph.
There was no joy in this moment, only the exhausted satisfaction of having told the truth. Daniel sat in the silence that followed, and Dorothy could see that he was broken. His marriage was over. The future he thought he had was shattered. But underneath the pain, she also saw something else. She saw the beginning of healing. She saw the moment when a man starts to understand that he has been living a lie, and begins the difficult work of building something true.
Dorothy sat down beside her son and took his hand. She did not say anything. She simply held him as he wept, and she understood that sometimes the cruelest thing a person can do is tell the truth. And sometimes the most loving thing a person can do is tell it anyway. The days that followed were not easy. Daniel moved through them like a man waking from a nightmare, uncertain if he was truly awake or still trapped in something he could not escape. The lawyers came and went. Papers were signed. Financial accounts were frozen. Bank records were submitted as evidence. The affair became a legal matter, part of a cold document that outlined betrayal in neat, organized paragraphs. But through it all, Dorothy was there. She moved into the guest room at the house on Maple Street. She cooked meals that her son barely ate. She answered the phone when relatives called with questions and shock and judgment. She held her son's hand during the darkest moments and reminded him that this was not his failure. This was not something he had caused or deserved. 1 week after Melissa left, Tom Patterson came to the house.
He was a tall man with graying hair, and an expression that suggested he had finally understood the consequences of his actions.
He had left his own wife. His marriage had crumbled just as Daniel's had. He had lost his job when the affair became known at the office, when Linda's evidence had been shared with the Human Resources Department and the leadership team understood that he had engaged in a relationship with a subordinate and contributed to financial misconduct. He stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets, looking at Daniel and Dorothy standing in the doorway, and he did something that surprised them both. He apologized. Not with excuses or justifications, but with genuine remorse. He apologized for the betrayal. He apologized for his role in destroying a marriage. He apologized for being too weak and selfish to do the right thing. Daniel listened to him, and then he said something that Dorothy would never forget. "I don't forgive you," he said quietly. "But I hope that someday you become someone worth forgiving." After Tom left, Daniel turned to his mother and asked her to stay. Not for a few days, not for a few weeks, but permanently. He asked her to move into the master bedroom, to make the house her home, to be part of the family he was rebuilding from the ashes of the family he thought he had. Dorothy agreed. She called her landlord and gave notice on her apartment. She packed up the life she had been living and brought it into the house on Maple Street. Within 2 months, she had transformed the space. The cold perfection that Melissa had created was replaced with warmth and comfort and the feeling of a home that was actually lived in, actually loved. The divorce proceedings took 6 months. Melissa fought for money, fought for the house, fought for everything she could get. But the evidence was insurmountable. The affair was documented. The theft was documented. The lies were documented. In the end, she received a settlement that was considerably smaller than what she had hoped for, and she signed the papers that officially ended her marriage to Daniel Hamilton. Daniel did not feel victorious when it was over. He felt relieved. He felt sad. He felt the complex emotions of a man who had lost something he thought he had, and was now learning to build something real in its place. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Daniel stood in his kitchen with his mother, and they planned something together. They planned a Christmas dinner. But not at the house on Maple Street. They planned it for Dorothy's place, a small house that Daniel had helped her purchase, a home that was entirely hers,
that bore none of the weight of her failed marriage or her son's betrayal.
Dorothy prepared the apple pie 3 weeks in advance, freezing it so that it would be perfect on Christmas Day. She cleaned her small house until it shone. She prepared a menu of family favorites, recipes passed down through generations, food that tasted like love and history and belonging. Daniel came early on Christmas morning to help set the table. Marcus came with his wife and their 2 children. Linda came, bringing a dessert she had made. Daniel's cousins came. Aunts and uncles came. Slowly, the small house filled with family, with noise, with the kind of warmth that cannot be manufactured or faked. When everyone sat down to eat, Daniel stood at the head of the table and asked for silence.
His eyes were on his mother, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of everything that had happened and everything that had been learned.
"I want to thank my mother," he said, "for loving me enough to tell me a truth that I did not want to hear. For having the courage to protect me when I could not protect myself. For showing me what real love looks like. Real love is not about convenient lies or comfortable deception. Real love is about standing beside someone and telling them the truth, even when that truth is painful.
Especially when that truth is painful."
He paused, and Dorothy could see tears in his eyes. "I also want to say that I am grateful for this moment. I am grateful to be surrounded by people who love me. I am grateful to be in my mother's home, a home built on truth and dignity and the refusal to accept anything less than what we deserve. This is what family should be. This is what Christmas should feel like." Everyone raised their glasses, and they toasted to Dorothy. They toasted to truth. They toasted to the strength it takes to do the right thing when the easy thing would be to stay silent. After dinner, as Dorothy was clearing plates, Daniel came into the kitchen and hugged his mother. He held her for a long time, and she could feel the gratitude in his embrace, the understanding of what she had sacrificed, the recognition of what her love had made possible. "I have something I want to say," Dorothy said quietly.
"And I want you to listen carefully."
Daniel pulled back and looked at his mother, waiting. "What happened between you and Melissa was not your fault. You did not cause her to betray you. You did not make her choose deception over honesty. She made those choices because of who she was, not because of anything you did or did not do. I want you to understand that. I want you to carry that with you as you move forward." Daniel nodded, and she could see that he was finally beginning to accept it. "But I also want to say something else," Dorothy continued.
"What you did, what you chose after you knew the truth, that was all you.
You chose to believe me. You chose to face reality instead of burying your head in denial. You chose to do the hard work of ending a marriage that was built on lies. Those choices took courage. I am proud of you." For the first time in months, Dorothy saw her son smile. It was not a big smile, but it was real. It was the smile of a man who was learning to forgive himself, who was understanding that healing was possible, who was beginning to believe that his life could still be good even though his dreams had shattered. As the evening wore on and the family lingered around the table, Dorothy found herself thinking about the Christmas that had begun with cruelty and humiliation. She thought about sitting alone on that cold porch, thought about the moment when she had decided that she would not accept injustice as her final story. She thought about the courage it had taken to investigate, to expose, to tell the truth even though it would hurt the person she loved most. And she understood something fundamental about life and love and family. She understood that sometimes being a mother means protecting your child from their own worst choices. Sometimes it means being willing to be the villain in someone else's story, to accept their anger and their resentment, because you know that what you are doing is right. Sometimes it means standing alone when everyone else would rather stay silent. But she also understood that the reward for that courage was what she now had. She had a son who respected her. She had a family that valued truth over comfort. She had a home filled with people who understood that real love is not about pretending everything is fine. Real love is about showing up, telling the truth, and standing together through the wreckage of what was false. As 2024 turned toward 2025, Dorothy sat in her small house with her son nearby, surrounded by family and warmth and the genuine laughter of people who knew and loved each other truly. The apple pie had been eaten. The dishes had been washed. The house smelled like cinnamon and hope. Dorothy understood that she had been tested, and she had not failed. She had been given a choice between silence and truth, between comfort and courage, and she had chosen wisely. She had chosen the harder path, and it had led her here to this moment, to this life that was more real and more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. The woman who had been told there was no place for her in her own family had reclaimed her place. But it was not the place she had occupied before. It was something stronger. It was a place of respect, of recognition, of understanding that a mother's love is not about being convenient or easy. It is about being true. And as Dorothy looked around the table at her son and her family and the life they were building together, she understood that there was no better revenge than living well. There was no greater victory than choosing truth over lies, love over cruelty, dignity over shame. She had lost nothing that was worth keeping. She had lost only the illusion of family with Melissa. And in its place, she had found something real. She had found her way home. But this story is not quite over, because stories like this one teach us something important. They teach us that we are all capable of both courage and cruelty. They teach us that family is not always a safe place, but it can be if we choose to make it one. They teach us that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it breaks things we thought were strong and permanent. As you sit with this story, I want you to ask yourself some questions. If you were in Dorothy's position, would you have had the courage to investigate? Would you have had the strength to expose the truth? Would you have been willing to sacrifice comfort for honesty? And if you were in Daniel's position, would you have been able to believe your mother? Would you have been able to accept that the woman you married was not who you thought she was? Would you have had the courage to choose truth over the illusion of family peace? These are not easy questions, and there are no perfect answers. But they matter. They matter because we are all faced with choices about what we will accept and what we will stand against. We are all faced with decisions about whether we will tell the truth or keep silent. We are all responsible for what we choose. So here is my challenge to you. Share this story with someone you love. Tell them about Dorothy and Daniel and the Christmas that changed everything. And then ask them what they would have done. Ask them how they would have handled the cruelty. Ask them if they would have found the courage to search for truth. And most importantly, ask yourself what kind of family member you want to be. Do you want to be someone who protects each other or someone who protects comfortable lies? Do you want to be someone who speaks up or someone who stays silent? Do you want to build a family based on truth or based on illusion? The answer matters. It matters for you. It matters for everyone you love. And it starts with choices you make today. Thank you for listening to the story of Dorothy Hamilton. Thank you for walking with her through her pain and her triumph. Please like this story, share it with your family, and subscribe to Voices of Auntie Belle so you never miss another story about the strength it takes to live with integrity. Where are you watching from today? Tell us in the comments. We love hearing from our family around the world. Your stories matter. Your voice matters. And your choices matter more than you know. This is Auntie Belle, reminding you that there is always a place for those who choose truth, and there is always a way forward for those brave enough to take it.